Rodney-O and Joe Cooley, Los Angeles, California, active since the early 80s. Before Kendrick Lamar's Pulitzer Prize and multi-platinum records, before Compton was immortalized in hip-hop as a birthplace of lyrical legends, there was a different West Coast sound shaking up the streets. It was raw, electric, and unapologetically loud. It was the sound of Rodney-O and Joe Cooley, two names that once echoed through California's underground scene with bass lines so thunderous they felt like earthquakes. Everlasting Bass was their anthem, an undeniable classic that left an imprint on the culture. It wasn't just music, it was a movement, one that defined the sound of Los Angeles and set the stage for the West Coast rise in hip-hop. But that was a long time ago, a time when the West Coast was just finding its voice, and Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were among its loudest pioneers. They are now locked in a legal battle against Kendrick Lamar, Future, and Metro Boomin. At the heart of their dispute is Everlasting Bass, the song that once made them pioneers, now allegedly sampled without permission for the chart-topping track Like That. A song that won awards, received massive streaming numbers, and was celebrated on some of hip-hop's biggest stages. For Rodney-O and Joe Cooley, it's more than just a fight over royalties. It's a fight for respect they feel they've been denied for decades, and a battle for recognition they should have never lost. But respect is a tricky thing in hip-hop. It can make you a legend or leave you forgotten, especially when the industry moves on. For Rodney-O and Joe Cooley, the industry left them behind. Their style, which once defined an era, became outdated. Their contributions were buried beneath the rise of G-Funk, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and the gangsta rap takeover that followed. By the time the West Coast was dominating hip-hop, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were little more than a memory, their legacy hidden beneath the beats of a new generation's success. And now, decades later, they find themselves in court demanding recognition they never truly received. Some might call it a desperate last stand. Others would see it as a long overdue reckoning, a reminder that before the West Coast became a global hit force, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were there, building the foundation. But how did they rise to prominence in the first place, and how did two pioneers become the forgotten forefathers of West Coast rap? For these three reasons. What happened? Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth Music. Get it, man. Take a minute to like, subscribe, and comment on who I should do next. Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were a groundbreaking hip-hop duo from California who rose to prominence in the mid-1980s. Rodney-O, known for his commanding voice and streetwise lyrics, paired perfectly with Joe Cooley, a masterful DJ celebrated for his skillful turntable techniques. Their breakthrough came with Everlasting Bass in 1986, a track that became a West Coast anthem. Their song's heavy bass lines and energetic delivery made it an underground classic, earning them a loyal fan base across California and beyond. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley released a string of albums including Me and Joe and Three the Hard Way that showcased their distinct style. They were pioneers of the West Coast early rap scene, predating the mainstream success of artists like NWA and Ice-T. Yet, despite their influence and foundational impact, mainstream recognition largely eluded them, leaving their legacy overlooked in hip-hop history. Stunt number 1, limited mainstream appeal. Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were undeniable pioneers of the West Coast rap scene, but their music never achieved the mainstream success of their peers. Despite their influence, they struggled to break into national radio playlists or receive significant backing from major record labels. Part of this was due to timing. They emerged in the mid-1980s when the industry was still dominated by East Coast hip-hop, and West Coast rap had yet to establish itself as a dominant force, remaining a regional movement without national visibility. While they did achieve underground fame, particularly with tracks like Everlasting Bass, their sound was considered too raw, too street-oriented, and too focused on bass-heavy production to appeal to the mainstream audience of the time. In an era where polished production and radio-friendly hooks became essential, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley remained fiercely independent, sticking to their hard-hitting electro-influenced style. But the same authenticity which earned them respect in underground circles also limited their crossover potential. They were seen as too niche for the average listener, their music a soundtrack for the streets but not for the radio. Another factor was the rapid evolution of West Coast hip-hop itself. By the early 1990s, a wave of artists like NWA, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Ice Cube were dominating the scene, bringing a more polished, G-funk sound that appealed to a broader audience. Compared to these rising stars, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley's style began to feel dated, a relic of a previous era. Their electro-rap, bass-heavy approach was overshadowed by the slick, melodic, and storytelling-driven sound of G-funk, which took the industry by storm. Without the backing of a major label, mainstream image, or evolving sound, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were effectively sidelined. Their contributions to the West Coast's foundation were recognized only by those who truly knew the scene's history. Stunt number 2, lack of strong label support. Another significant factor in the decline of Rodney-O and Joe Cooley was their lack of strong label support. While many of their West Coast peers eventually signed with major labels that had the resources to promote their music, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley operated largely within independent circles. This independence was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed them creative freedom and the ability to maintain their sound without industry interference. But on the other hand, it meant they lacked the marketing muscle and financial backing needed to push their records to a wider audience. Without a major label's promotional budget, their albums struggled to achieve national visibility. Radio play was limited, and their music videos received little rotation on MTV or BET, which were critical platforms for hip-hop artists during the late 1980s and early 90s. Even in their own backyard, Los Angeles radio stations began shifting focus toward the emerging G-funk sound, leaving the duo's electro-heavy style feeling outdated. Furthermore, the absence of a dedicated label meant that Rodney-O and Joe Cooley had to handle much of their own management, booking, and distribution, stretching them thin and leaving them without the professional support network that many of their peers enjoyed. This lack of infrastructure made it difficult for them to compete with more polished acts backed by major labels. Their albums such as Me and Joe and 3 the Hard Way, while respected in underground circles, didn't receive the marketing push needed to make them commercial successes. In an era when image and exposure were becoming just as important as talent, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley were left behind. Many fans outside of California struggling to find their music in stores, limiting their reach. Without the financial backing of a major label, they were trapped in a circle of underground fame, respected but rarely celebrated on a national stage. Stunt number 3, changing sound and shifting trends. Rodney-O and Joe Cooley's signature sound, which was once cutting-edge and electrifying, became their biggest obstacle as hip-hop evolved. The duo's bass-heavy, electro-infused style was a product of the mid-1980s, a time when hip-hop was still experimenting with electronic beats and dance-oriented rhythms. But as the genre matured, taste shifted dramatically. By the early 90s, West Coast rap had embraced a new identity defined by G-funk, a smooth melodic sound driven by funk samples and laid-back streetwise lyrics. In this new era, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley's stripped-down booming bass lines and rapid vocal delivery felt outdated. As Dr. Dre's The Chronic and Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style became cultural phenomenons, the sophisticated production and storytelling of G-funk made Rodney-O and Joe Cooley's minimalistic beats seem primitive. They struggled to adapt to the new sonic landscape, and while their loyal fan base in California continued to support them, their appeal beyond the region faded significantly. Additionally, the rise of gangsta rap shifted hip-hop's narrative focus. Lyrical content moved from party anthems and boastful rhymes to gritty street tales, social commentary, and violent imagery. Rodney-O's style, which was more about party vibes and energetic delivery, seemed out of touch with the darker, more introspective themes that dominated the era. In a world where authenticity was measured by street credibility, their music struggled to find a place. The duo did attempt to evolve, but their efforts to modernize never quite resonated. They released new music, experimented with updated sounds, and tried to keep pace with the changing times. But without a clear direction or a fresh sound to match the new era, their releases failed to capture the attention of a younger audience who saw them as part of hip-hop's past. Rodney-O and Joe Cooley became legends who were respected but rarely celebrated. All in all, Rodney-O and Joe Cooley's story is one of early innovation met with fading recognition. They were among the first to establish a distinct West Coast sound, a style that inspired countless artists who came after them. Yet, despite their contributions, they were ultimately overshadowed by the rise of G-Funk, gangsta rap, and the polished, mainstream-friendly image that dominated the 90s. Their ongoing legal battle with Kendrick Lamar, Future, and Metro Boomin over the alleged unauthorized use of everlasting bass is more than just a legal dispute. It's a fight for acknowledgement and validation. For Rodney-O and Joe Cooley, it's a final stand, a reminder that before the West Coast was a global force in hip-hop, they helped lay the foundation. Legends who never got their flowers when they deserved them, now in a fight to be recognized, not just in court, but in the pages of hip-hop history. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, their growth was stunted. It's your boy JC, StuntedGrowthMusic, and I'm out.